CIA Director George Tenet at the center of the storm. The United States did not go to war in Iraq solely because of WMD. In my view, I doubt it was even the principal cause, yet it was the public face that was put on it. The leaders of a country decided to go to war because of core beliefs, larger geostrategic calculations, ideology, and in the case of Iraq, because of the administration's largely unarticulated view that the democratic transformation of the Middle East through regime change in Iraq would be worth the price. WMD was, as Paul Wolfowitz put it, something that we settled on because it was the one issue that everyone could agree on. The President of the United States cannot do whatever he wants simply out of good intentions. An orchestrated deception is corrupt no matter how you slice it. You'd think we would have learned by now that unintended consequences are invariably on the other side of such cavalier adventures. Apologists epitomize those who want to have their cake and eat it too. There is no measure for how far they will move the goalpost to validate their views. We were told with absolute certainty that WMD was the rationale for war, and when none were found, it became WMD program-related activities. Yet those most loyal to Bush are the most ardent advocates of personal responsibility. Hubris. When Bush had campaigned for governor in the early 1990s, he'd flown about on a jet called Accountability One. When he ran for president in 2000, Bush claimed accountability as one of his campaign themes, and his aides dubbed his campaign jet Responsibility One. But there has been no accountability for those who were wrong about Iraq, about the threat, or about what would come after the invasion. Bush fired no one. Nobody resigned in disgrace. There were no consequences. That's a pretty casual attitude toward people who supposedly provided him with a bad intel. When I told a friend that no one had been fired, instead of pondering the point, he asked me if I had a letter from the White House to prove it. Does anyone really believe that it would have mattered if I did? It never ceases to amaze me how intelligent people can show such disdain for correction. It is astounding how the mind can pull off psychological gymnastics that allows us to believe what we say without any sense of accounting for it. Radio host Neil Bortz, May 26, 2004. U.S. forces in Iraq have now confirmed that the shell found in a roadside bomb in Iraq did indeed contain sarin gas. There you are, an actual weapon of mass destruction used against American troops in Iraq. It didn't kill a lot of American soldiers because it was improperly used. In fact, it was an artillery shell, the existence of which had not been previously revealed to the United Nations by Saddam's government. This is quite a problem for the Bush-lied crowd. Here we have not only a chemical weapon, but it's one that Saddam never even told us he had. I heard Neil touting this revelation on the radio. He and his disciples were congratulating themselves in full-bore folly. These are people who never exerted the slightest effort in educating themselves on the subject matter, and yet they are consumed by certitude in the most narrow context. All the sarin gas shells in the world would have no bearing on the aluminum tubes and other intel. But loyalist illogical fallacies are not burdened by the inconvenience of fact. They will nitpick over pebbles while refusing to glance at the mountain of evidence that crushes their convictions. In The Insider, Al Pacino masterfully portrays the unconscionable absurdity that an apologist will peddle.
And now, even now, when every word of what Wygant has said on our show is printed, the entire deposition of his testimony in a court of law in the state of Mississippi, the cat totally out of the bag, you're still standing here debating. Don, what the hell else do you need?
We have become a society of spin doctors who manipulate language anytime it suits our needs. Nowadays, you can agree to disagree about subject matter that you know absolutely nothing about. Being smoothly smug is now considered civil. Never mind the notion of genuine courtesy that comes with the willingness to be wrong. We begin and end our conversations believing that we're right, shunning the discipline it takes to be correct. I think the following sheds light on how we created a culture that thrives on eradicating reason anytime we perceive a threat to our interest. Philosopher Harry Gordon Frankfurt. Bullshitters seek to convey a certain impression of themselves without being concerned about whether anything at all is true. They quietly change the rules governing their end of the conversation so that claims about truth and falsity are irrelevant. Another classic characteristic of apologists is that they will ignore any amount of incongruity by those they believe in, but the slightest appearance of impropriety by the opposition is seen as intolerable. That Joe Wilson's wife was involved in any way with his trip to Africa provided endless fodder for the talking points parade to cry foul. A mountain of mayhem was raised to the tune of nepotism, and once again the central issues were drowned out. In the spirit of transparency, Wilson did embellish his case a bit by muddling some facts. Naturally, the scoffer seized on his slip-ups and in so doing summarily rejected his well-founded conclusions on the Yellowcake claim. It is disingenuous in the extreme to pounce on the messenger's relatively minor mistakes while flagrantly ignoring the epic deceit engineered at the highest levels of government. As for Valerie Plame, it's the pinnacle of hypocrisy that those who think they have a monopoly on patriotism would happily ridicule someone who spent her career in clandestine service to the nation. The bottomless pit of disregard for her dedication is appalling. That the Wilsons became a household name is emblematic of our nation's insatiable appetite for all things oversimplified.